Good afternoon and welcome to March 8th Quest Club meeting. John Rogers will give the invocation. John?
At home, it seems like a lot of our discussions with my spouse tend to center around where our country is headed in 2024. So I'm naturally a glass half full kind of person. So being an optimist, I went searching for a few inspirational quotes for today. In 1960, Richard Nixon conceded to John F. Kennedy. Speaking of voters, he said that he hoped that they will unite behind our next president in seeing that America does meet the challenge that destiny has placed upon us to give leadership to the whole world, which will produce a world in which all men and women can have what we have in the United States: freedom, independence, and the right to live in peace with our neighbors. In 2000, Al Gore conceded to George W. Bush, in part with these words: "This campaign ends as it began, with faith in God and the country I have been so proud to serve." He then added, "Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, 'Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism.' I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you." Gore continued, "Well, now in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that the remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country." And in a lighter vein, two of my favorites. First, the old one from Winston Churchill: "You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else." And this from a column by George Will, where he attributed the quote to 19th century Prussian leader Otto von Bismarck: "There is a providence that protects idiots, drunkards, children, and the United States of America." And to that I would add, God bless the United States. Amen.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you someone I'm sure you know, Michael Galbraith. He is going to present a paper on the wit and humor of the New Yorker magazine. Michael is the president and CEO of Downtown Fort Wayne, working to make downtown Fort Wayne the vibrant urban center of Northeast Indiana. And I'll just put a parentheses additional remark here. He has certainly been successful along with those with whom he has worked. I come out of Toledo, Ohio, coming to Fort Wayne, and I wish Toledo could have the same success that Fort Wayne is having. There's such a great spirit here, and building on that spirit is something that is very meaningful to me and my family, and it's meaningful to all the residents, I'm sure, of this area. We've lived in Pittsburgh and we've lived in Toledo, Ohio, and in both places there was always kind of a down spirit in terms of the vibrancy of the city. Pittsburgh's on the upswing. Toledo, I regret to say, isn't. But Fort Wayne is really on the upswing, and Matt, thanks for your Michael, thanks for your contribution in doing that. Appreciate it. Michael also coordinates the 11-county Northeast Indiana Regional Development Authority, which implements the $42 million regional cities and $50 million READY initiatives in Northeast Indiana. He previously served as director of the Road to 1 Million at the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership, executive director of Arch Incorporated, Fort Wayne's nonprofit historic architectural preservation group and preservation specialist at Arch. He has played French horn in the Fort Wayne Philharmonic since 1990. Galbraith is also active in the community, currently serving on the boards of the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, Arch Inc., History Center, and Greater Fort Wayne Inc. He holds bachelor's degrees in French horn and history from Southern Methodist University, a master's degree in French horn from Indiana University, and a master's degree in historic preservation from Ball State University. This is excuse me, this is Michael's fourth paper. Michael?
In my previous three papers, I was able to feel like I had some degree of understanding of the subject and had started on the road to subject matter competence. For this, the more I dug into the subject, not only did the hole get deeper, it seemed to get wider at an equally quick speed. I really was, and still am, astonished at the amount and quality of the material in and about the New Yorker. I'm not a New Yorker guy, I have to confess. The Economist is more my speed and style as a go-to general magazine. So a lot of this was pretty unfamiliar territory for me, and I still feel like I understand far less than I would like to. Note to the program committee, the material in this topic can cover several other additional Quest Club papers. When I began researching and writing, because I'm a nerd, I started by asking myself, why is something funny? And how many ways are there to be funny? And how do you know if something is funny or if someone is funny? Looking it up in a dictionary, humor is defined as the quality of being amusing. Not a lot of help there. So continue to try to figure out why things are funny. Science is pretty unsettled on both the discipline and concept of humor. Scientific theories look at 3 or 4 typologies of humor: superiority or put down humor, the Freudian theory of release, dealing with reaction to the inappropriate or the risque in humor, and the theory of incongruity between expectation and reality. Mountains of case studies and dissertations delve into these theories. 2 of our staff at downtown Fort Wayne work side gigs in the stand-up comedy industry, so I asked them what makes comedy, and for that matter, all humor, work. They came up with 2 essential ingredients: establishing a bond between performer and audience, and providing a safe space in which the audience feels free to laugh. The first is essential to any presentation. Any good speaker knows that one of the most important pieces of advice is know your audience. We hear the same sentiment when someone is admonished for an inappropriate interaction in a public presentation: read the room. If I had started this talk with an offensive racial or religious joke, using the theory of superiority, or a crude sexual barb, theory of release, I'd certainly deserve the silence of disapproval for not knowing my audience. The bond between performer or source and their audience is also a two-way street, with the audience entering the relationship with expectations for the performer. The audience at the recent Tim Allen comedy show downtown expected far different humor than did the audience at the Bill Maher show. Quest Club members have certain expectations from every speaker. The other key ingredient is a space in which the audience feels a license to laugh. This is sometimes a physical requirement, maybe a crowded, dark room with the perception of anonymity, the safety that a lack of critical social judgment provides. Not only that, but especially for written humor like The New Yorker, the perception that you are part of an entity, a collection of similar souls who are part of an exclusive group that shares outlook, values, social cohesion, and the ability to share humor. So how does this apply to the topic of the wit and humor of The New Yorker? I'll go through a brief overview of the history of the magazine and break out a few sections in the magazine with overview and example of the uses of humor. 99 years ago, legendary founding New Yorker editor Harold Ross sent out a letter, actually more like a manifesto, it was several pages long, to potential subscribers and investors, thus setting the expectation between audience and magazine. Its first and last paragraphs summarize what that expectation was and dramatically what it was not. In quotes, "The New Yorker will be a reflection in word and picture of metropolitan life. Its general tenor will be one of gaiety, wit, and satire, but it will be more than a jester. It will not be what is commonly called highbrow or radical. It will be what is commonly called sophisticated, in that it will assume a reasonable degree of enlightenment on the part of its readers. It will hate bunk." Bunk was one of Ross's favorite words to avoid. The New Yorker will be the magazine which is not edited for the old lady in Dubuque. Again, if you've seen anything written about the New Yorker, the old lady in Dubuque is the person who it's not written for in many, many analyses of the magazine. It will not be concerned with what she is thinking about. This is not meant in disrespect, but the New Yorker is a magazine avowedly published for a metropolitan audience and thereby will escape an influence which hampers most national publications. It expects a considerable national circulation, but this will come from persons who have a metropolitan interest. The audience of the New Yorker, outlined even before the first issue, would be the urban and the urbane. It would be for the sophisticated, the metropolitan, and above all for New Yorkers, or those that wish they were. In many ways, it set up a system in which there was an in crowd, readers of the magazine, and those that got its humor, and the out crowd, epitomized by the old lady from Dubuque, who didn't get it and probably never would. By somewhat choosing and targeting their audience, the editors of the magazine were able to define and seek their contributors. They were, in effect, packing the audience for the performance. In his book, The New Yorker and the World It Made, Ben Yagoda captured the spirit of the magazine in one paragraph. The New Yorker was sophistication in the form of a weekly magazine. Its early incarnation was animated by the qualities embodied in the world. It was knowing, a trifle world-weary, prone to self-consciousness and irony, scornful of conversational wisdom or morality, resistant to enthusiasm or wholehearted commitment of any kind, and incapable of being shocked. As the magazine started in the Roaring '20s, New York was this cultural, social, intellectual, and economic center of the United States and drew the ambitious in all of those fields. It was, as a later singer would croon, a city that never sleeps. For magazines, it was also an equally strong time before the rise of mass radio, television, and the internet. Along with newspapers, it was how people received news and how communities connected. Magazines connected aficionados of various topics ranging from the technical to the societal, from popular mechanics to Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and Harper's Bazaar, now all more than a century old. The New Yorker was fortunate in maintaining a continuity of style, content, wit, and humor based in large part on two things: the continuity of ownership and the continuity of editorial staff. Initially owned by Ross and entrepreneur Raul H. Fleischman, heir to a baking company fortune that included Fleischman's yeast, ownership remained in the Fleischman family through Raul's death in 1969 and then later through 1985 in his heirs. In that year, S.I. Newhouse of publishing conglomerate Advanced Publications, also known as Condé Nast, purchased the New Yorker for $200 million. He initially took a more hands-on approach, merging business departments and, quote, modernizing the magazine. It remains part of that conglomerate to this day. The editorial staff has had the most impact on developing a New Yorker style of wit and humor, though this changed somewhat over time, as has the literary content of the magazine. There have been 4 major editorial periods, 3 of which are defined by legendary editors whose tenures lasted more than a quarter century. Founding editor Harold Ross envisioned a magazine that would be smart and witty, as he hoped his readers would be. Alongside Ross as editors were legendary Catherine Angel and her future husband, E.B. White. For those of you who have a tingling of recognition at the name E.B. White, it's either as a happy childhood memory as the author of Stuart Little and Charlotte's Web, or it's as the late night deadline college bibliography sweats as the editor of The Elements of Style with Strunk and White. The New Yorker in the 20s was unified by themes of sophistication, class, talk, and New York. And the audience during White's tenure responded by becoming some of the most loyal subscribers in the publishing industry. As the Depression hit, the magazine remained on solid financial footing even as competitors folded. As the Depression of the 30s rolled into the World War II years of the early 40s, the New Yorker began to take on more of the serious role of a thought-provoking journal, a mission that it maintains to this day. Initially, this was due to the coverage of the rise of Nazism in the 30s and World War II in the 40s. The illustrations of this era certainly had elements of wit, humor, satire, paradox, illogic, and absurdity, but were at the same time deeply and life-alteringly serious. Janet Flanner's 1936 piece on Adolf Hitler started this journey, in which traveled through frontline wartime reports of drafted New Yorker contributors to the groundbreaking Hiroshima article in 1946 by John Hershey. As in the written pieces, assumptions were made about the audience, that they were smart, well-read, urbane, and engaged. Foundations for future readership were laid during the war years with smaller wartime editions that were distributed to soldiers. In 1945, as New York entered its second, even larger post-war renaissance, fueled by money, victory, and foreign intelligentsia, the New Yorker responded by entering a second golden age, with subscriptions jumping from 172,000 in 1941 to 370,000 in 1952, only a decade later. When Ross passed away in 1952, his longtime right-hand man, William Shawn, took over as editor in 1951. Shawn was a quiet conservator while he gathered power to himself, but he kept keeping the ship running more or less the same for some 35 years until his ouster in 1987. His style played to remarkable success in the 50s, with declining relevance as counterculture grew in the 60s and 70s and threatened irrelevance in the 80s. The emphasis on almost pedantic, thoroughly fact-checked fiction discouraged the new journalism school that arose in the 60s and 70s, with a scathing 1965 article by Tom Wolfe lambasting New Yorker culture. The cartoons became a bit more stilted and restrained under Shawn's tenure as well. If you want a visual picture of Shawn, you can think of his son Wallace, who became a successful character actor in the 90s with roles as Vizzini in The Princess Bride, so inconceivable if you've ever seen that movie, and as the lovelorn Mr. Hall in Clueless. After his ouster by Newhouse in 1987, the third editorial period began under Robert Gottlieb from 1987 to 1992, and Tina Brown from 1992 to 1998. Although lasting only 5 years and 6 years respectively, Gottlieb and Brown thoroughly upended the traditions and tipped many of the sacred cows of The New Yorker, particularly under Brown. Gottlieb was a New Yorker growing up with the magazine and injected a casual exuberance into the staid, pedagogical, and editing process. Brown was British and had no problems not just tipping the sacred cows, but goring them and standing on top of their dying carcass. From the introduction of photography in 1992 to the seeking of publicity to tying journalism to the promotion of upcoming events, Brown was revolutionary. Her surprise departure in 1998 led to the fourth editorial period under David Rebnick, who remains editor today. His approach recentered the pendulum from Brown back closer to the original conception under Ross. As the New Yorker began in 1925, that audience envisioned by Ross was not yet a reality, simply a target. Key to attracting that audience was sophisticated wit in several forms. The easiest breakdown is between word and drawing. In drawing, and it's most definitely drawing under Ross and later under Shawn, not pictures or photos until Brown, there's a division between cover and cartoon. In words, there were various lengths of commentary, from snippets like Talk of the Town to short stories and eventually monumental multi-part reports. Many of those reports are not particularly funny. Drawings. At the heart of the New Yorker's charm lies its legendary cartoons, a visual feast that has become synonymous with the more than 5,000 issues of the magazine. For most readers, these are the first thing they look at in each week's issue, and certainly the quickest to digest. These cartoons, often accompanied by succinct captions, serve as a vehicle for capturing the absurdities and intricacies of modern life. The New Yorker's cartoons are distinguished by their keen observations of human nature. They serve as a visual commentary on the nuances of society, politics, and everyday interactions. They are as often defined by as much as what they are not as what they are. From dry wit to slapstick humor, New Yorker cartoons cover a spectrum of the comedic styles mentioned earlier and maintain the remarkable ability to evoke laughter while simultaneously promoting reflection. Although the intent was never to establish a New Yorker, quote, style of cartoons, this has certainly been the result. This is due to the remarkable consistency of early editors Harold Ross and William Shawn. Longtime art editor Jim Garrity served under both Ross and Shawn, and as much as or more than these two editors, served as the gatekeeper and style definer of visual humor. Also contributing this was the editorial process of the New Yorker that encouraged extensive revision and polishing. Sometimes a piece would be tweaked and edited for inclusion over years of editing process. The magazine itself did not have staff cartoonists, or for that matter, staff writers. It had a submission process that encouraged regular submittal by new talented prospects and stalwart contributors, as well as accepting unsolicited material for review. For many of the cartoonist mentions, this relationship with the magazine lasted decades. The famously high exposure, high esteem, and low per-piece pay of the New Yorker meant that these contributors used the critical acclaim to broaden their audience. If there was not a secondary source of income, whether commercial or familial, writing or drawing for the New Yorker was the classic story of the starving artist. Cartoonists like James Thurber and Peter Arno emerged as the early masters, contributing to the New Yorker's unique cartooning style. Their work set the tone for a tradition that would become synonymous with the magazine. On your tables, you should have a packet with some of those cartoons of Thurber and Arno as you will go through. The early cartoons were characterized by a keen sense of humor combined with a perceptive observation of social norms. Artists captured the essence of the Roaring Twenties, offering readers a satirical lens through which to view the world. James Thurber was a polymath whose literary and cartoon contributions defined the early years of the New Yorker. His whimsical and lighthearted cartoons often delved into the idiosyncrasies of relationships and daily life. His simple, expressive lines, gentle satire, exposition of rampant miscommunication between the sexes, and exasperation with the pace and change of technological change became as much a part of the New Yorker as his literary contributions. Peter Arno's cartoons, gracing the pages of the New Yorker from the 1920s to the 1960s, also played a pivotal role in shaping the magazine's identity. His unique blend of sophistication, irreverence, and keen social observation elevated cartooning to a new form, leaving an indelible mark on the genre. Arno's illustrations were known for their meticulous attention to detail. The precision of his drawings added a layer of complexity to the humor, making each cartoon a visual feast. Arno's humor had a sharp, satirical bite that often took aim at the pretensions of the upper crust. His cartoons were a playful yet pointed critique of societal norms, poking fun at the foibles of the elites and the New Yorkers. His keen observations of the upper echelons of New York's social scene provided a humorous lens through which readers could reflect on their own lives or on the lives that they aspired to. His observations on the battle of the sexes were charming, mischievous, and sometimes risque. His most iconic drawing, and I think that's in the packet that you have on your table, is called Back to the Drawing Board. I did not know that this came from a cartoon, but it's entered the lexicon without most people realizing its origin. As you can see from the drawing, it's an architect walking away from a plane crash while everyone's rushing to work on the plane crash, and he's, back to the drawing board. A third early cartoonist was Charles Addams, whose first cartoon in 1935 introduced a morbid, visual quirkiness to the magazine. His macabre and humorous depictions became iconic, adding a layer of diversity to the New Yorker's visual storytelling. The Addams Family, featuring Gomez and Morticia Addams, Wednesday, Pugsley, and Uncle Fester originated from these cartoons, showcasing a blend of humor and the bizarre that left an indelible mark on an early television audience. Saul Steinberg first published in the New Yorker in 1941. Like a number of other Jewish intellectuals escaping Nazism in World War II, he brought the lens of his European upbringing and harrowing escape to the magazine. Steinberg's intricate and thought-provoking drawings often explored the complexities of the human experience. His distinctive style and ability to convey profound profound ideas through simple yet impactful images, like the one that says no in your packet, made him a linchpin of the New Yorker's cartoon tradition. He was particularly adept at alternating between simple lines and extraordinarily complex details. The last cartoonist I'll mention is William Steig. That, of course, leaves the work of many thousands of cartoonists unspoken. With 20 to 30 drawings per issue, appearing weekly over almost a century, the number is over 100,000. William Steig, 1907 to 2003, joined the ranks of contributors in 1930 and contributed an enormous number of pieces to the magazine, over 2,600 cartoons and 117 covers. He supplemented his New Yorker income by illustrating or authoring dozens of books and achieved widespread commercial success as an 83-year-old with the release of his book, Shrek. So it was released in 1990, and later it was the genesis of an extraordinarily successful movie franchise. So moving on to covers. The inaugural issue of the New Yorker in February 21st, 1925 remains its most well-known. Dubbed Eustace Tilley and created by editor Ray Irvin, who coincidentally created the iconic typeface, the figure represents in subtle visual form the ideal reader of the New Yorker, sophisticated, witty, and intelligent. This cover returns on anniversaries, often as a parody or with a contemporary spin. Usually black and white line work with a muted palette drawing in the empty space, the drawing of the top-hatted dandy harkens back to a previous vision of a society gentleman. Other covers also used wit, humor, irony, satire to make a point, although many New Yorker covers are not, nor were they intended to be funny. Probably hanging on the walls, at least at some point in your life, was the Saul Steinberg cover of the New York map of the world, showing the city in close-up great detail, while the rest of the U.S. and other countries and continents are shapeless blobs. It spoke volumes about who the New Yorker readers were or aspired to be. One that certainly hung on my wall was the 1984 work by Jean-Jacques Sempe, poking fun at the conventions of the orchestral bow. Like the Steinberg cover, it assumes a certain knowledge of the reader without some familiarity of the often stilted conventions of classical music. The work is not nearly as humorous. The September 24, 2001 cover, later at the back of the cover section, is an example of the timely, topical, and decidedly not funny cover. One cover that I missed talking about is the cover that appeared after D-Day. You can see that in your packet, and it's references the Bayeux Tapestry as a humorous version that references a very contemporary event in D-Day. Turning now to the wit and humor of the written word, the New Yorker used different lengths, forms, and conventions of essays and articles for humorous purpose. As with its covers, the prose of the magazine was not, nor was it intended to be universally humorous or witty. It was, however, maintaining a bond with the audience, assumed to be urban and urbane, demanding of the reader a certain well-read erudition and worldliness. Nearly a century after its founding, the New Yorker remains an institution in American journalism. Its influence extends far beyond the pages of a weekly magazine, permeating literature, humor, and societal discourse. The enduring significance of the New Yorker lies not only in its ability to adapt to the times, but it's also in its unwavering commitment to the principles set forth by its founder, a commitment to intellectual rigor, incisive wit, and an unapologetic exploration of the human experience. Founding editor Ross was by training a newspaperman, and before journalism was a profession. He brought to the New Yorker his biases and experiences from that fact-driven career and established a legendary editorial process for a humor and literary magazine. Each submission was checked multiple times for accuracy, and suggestions were given to authors on how to improve their work. These ranged from complete excise of entire pages to probing questions based on fact. This led to a distinct New Yorker style that was widely admired until it wasn't. Ross's successor, Sean, was an even more meticulous editor, although his inability to adapt ultimately cost him his job. Underneath the editor was a pyramid of other fact-checkers, junior editors, and okayers. Each piece is read multiple times, each fact or reference verified, sources double-checked for accuracy, background material examined for context, and finally, conversations with the author. Although typically anonymous, New Yorker fact-checkers like John Updike have used this position as a springboard to more creative submissions. A somewhat well-known humorous story about William Shawn and fact-checking is about a 1960s story in which, based on drug culture, a roach is left on a mantelpiece, and the story continues on. Shawn's unironic comment later in the review was, "This roach hasn't moved in 5 pages." Tom Wolfe lambasted this process in his New York Herald Tribune mock tabloid entitled "Tiny Mummies: The True Story of the Ruler of 43rd Street's Land of the Walking Dead." Talk of the Town. The Talk of the Town section, appearing at the front of each New Yorker magazine, is known for its short-form satirical commentary on a wide range of topics. Edited for years by legendary New Yorker contributor Lillian Ross, no relation, started in 1945 and continuing for 7 decades, only slightly shorter than her 40-year stint as William Shawn's mistress. Talk of the Town became a fixture of the magazine. The usually anonymous writers of the Talk of Town often employed a clever writing style, using wordplay and puns to convey their points. The humor is often intellectual and appeals to readers who value both absurdity and mocking wit. Frequently engaging in satire, the section uses humor to comment on current events, societal norms, and other cultural phenomena. The writers poke fun at politics, popular culture, and everyday situations, providing readers with a humorous lens through which to view the world. The poor editing or unintentional gaffes of the written word from other publications is often featured with a knowing wink pointing out the not subtle errors to a readership in on the in-joke. The absurdities of brief situational comedy are also a staple of the section. For those old enough to remember telephone charges before unlimited plans, the 1984 Garrison Keillor piece, Phone Call to Europe, which is included in your packet, is a great example. The humor in this section sometimes takes on an absurd or surreal quality, with writers presenting scenarios or observations that border on the fantastical. This style of humor allows for creative and imaginative commentary on real-world situations. Lillian Ross's 1960 work, Yellow Bus, about 18 Hoosiers from Bean Blossom, Indiana, is a journalistic classic combining the odd, the mundane, and the drolly vicious about both New York and Indiana, standing in for literally everywhere else that isn't New York. Talk of the Town often features character profiles and anecdotes that highlight the eccentricities of individuals or capture amusing moments. The writers excel in finding humor in the ordinary and bringing out the quirks and idiosyncrasies of people. Giving the continuing connection to New York City, the humor in Talk of the Town frequently reflects the unique characteristics and happenings of the Big Apple. Irony and sarcasm are common tools used in this section. This section frequently includes pop culture references and parodies, demonstrating an awareness of current trends in media. By integrating these references, the writers connect with readers who are attuned to the cultural landscape. The brevity of pieces in Talk of the Town contributes to the humor, allowing for concise and impactful commentary. They often deliver a punchline or humorous insight within a relatively short space. Reviews. The New Yorker also has a storied tradition of reviews, from the architectural and urban development reviews of Louis Mumford, in which humor was almost totally subjugated to academic criticism, to legendary acerbic movie critic Pauline Kael, whose biting humor was on full display. The concept of wit and humor vacillated in the New Yorker. Some of Kael's most biting include these. Of the movie Endless Love, a predictable fiasco. Still, it's considerably worse than expected. Of the movie The Blue Max, addicts of flying movies swear by this one, but for others, the monoplanes and biplanes can't smash and burn fast enough. And finally, of the movie The King of Marvin Gardens, starring Jack Nicholson 2 years after Easy Rider, and roughly modeled on William Shawn's son, Wallace, this is the unqualified disaster that only talented people can have. The producer, Bob Rafelson, and the scriptwriter, Jacob Brackman, seem to be saying, let them eat metaphors. The tradition of biting reviews continues after Cale's departure, whether building, book, fashion, or movie. These two are from Anthony Lane. Advance word on Con Air said that it was all about an airplane with an unusually dangerous and potentially lethal load. Big deal. You should try the lunches they serve out of Newark. Compared with the chicken napalm that I ate on my flight last night, the men in Con Air are about as dangerous as balloons. And on the book, The Bridges of Madison County, I got my copy at the airport behind a guy who was buying Playboy's book of lingerie, and I think he had the better deal. He certainly looked happy with his purchase, whereas I had to ask for a paper bag. Fiction in the New Yorker represents the work of the most important authors of the 20th century. Ranging from the briefest contributions to multi-part stories, the imprimatur of being published in the New Yorker was an awesome feather in any author's cap, a pinnacle of professional success, and often the stepping stone that would launch a career. Listing only a few of the tens of thousands of authors' names reads like a wall of fame. James Thurber, E.B. White, Dorothy Parker, Stephen Bartlemay, Truman Capote, Rachel Carson, John Cheever, Roald Dahl, Ernest Hemingway, Stephen King, Alice Munro, Haruki Murakami, Vladimir Nabokov, J.D. Salinger, and John Updike. Pretty good list. Humor in the fiction in the New Yorker continues to be characterized by that distinctive blend of wit, irony, social commentary, absurdity, intellectual humor, and satire. Lending to its prestige and influence as a literary magazine, the New Yorker has a long history of publishing short stories that often showcase an urbane narrative style. Examples of this form are from a who's who of American authors: Woody Allen, David Sedaris, John Updike, Garrison Keillor, and Paul Rudnick. With over 5,000 editions, the list contains tens of thousands of humorous articles. These represent as many styles of humor as possible, but are often unified by certain New Yorkiness, intellectualism, and faux and real sophistication that unifies its audience. There is often an in-club feel that pervades the fiction. Things may be odd, weird, or troubling, but at least it's New York, and that's better than anywhere else. Dorothy Parker, one of the mainstays of the Algonquin Round Table, was an important early contributor as well as a master of satire and of the quick, deadly one-liner. Her native New Yorker cred shone through in her work, seeing tragedy and comedy as two sides of the same coin, and joie de vivre and ennui as equal parts of her life. Two of her most famous one-liners were, "Beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes clean to the bone." And if you want to know what God really thinks of money, just look at the people he gave it to. She contributed 149 articles, poems, short stories, and short fiction to the New Yorker. Targets of the satire in her stories were described with a biting wit. Quote, the woman with the pink velvet poppies twined round the assisted gold of her hair traversed the crowded room at an interesting gait, combining a skip with a sidle and clutched the lean arm of her host. In one sentence, Parker sets the visual stage while simultaneously skewering the hair color, fashion sense, and movement of her target. In No Cottage for Weinstein, Woody Allen is able to complain about New York and insult New Jersey in only 13 words. Quote, some city, period. Chaos everywhere. I wonder what the people of New Jersey do. New York may be fakakta, but at least it's better than Jersey. So for Allen, the city is the metaphor for the inner turmoil and stress of his characters, whether in prose or in film. He took a brief break from writing for The New Yorker from 1980 to 2000 to work on other side projects, including a giant library of film. The Annie Hall look, made popular in his early film by Diane Keaton, was borrowed from a fellow New Yorker writer named Jamaica Kincaid. Obviously, this paper only scratches the surface of the roughly 500,000 pages over a century of The New Yorker magazine. Throughout every issue, wit and humor is interlaced with the most serious of literature, criticism, and cultural observations. It has defined not only the intellectual culture of the United States for a century. For much of its history, having a New Yorker magazine on your coffee table identified you as a certain kind of person, well-read, able to laugh at yourself, urban and urbane. It remains, in our digital age, a potent arbiter of taste, humor, and civic discussion. Thank you.